Hello ladies and gentlemen. So I decided this is the first, technically the first political video I'm uploading on this channel, and I have to give a little bit of an explanation. Basically, I've been thinking about this for quite some time now. I've been increasingly getting interested in politics in the past few years, whereas before that I guess I considered myself an anarchist. Even before I knew exactly what the term meant, even before I'd even heard the term. I was a typical, the left and right is the same, and there's no point voting, and it's all a scam, etc., that type of thing. But the past few years, I've been more and more interested in politics, as a lot of people have. I suppose a lot of former out there conspiracists, a lot of these people with the advent of Orange Man became more and more political because they realized that, hey, this guy's different. So I don't want to get into a tangent now with Mr. T, but Orange Man, not bad, definitely not bad. Orange Man, good. And when I saw him in late 2015 announce his run, I realized, okay, this is something that's never happened before. I read his energy, I read energies, see, because I developed my intuitive faculties a lot since the past 20 years. So I just saw him for what he was. And he was one of us, basically, who miraculously got into that position and was competent enough and had the right connections and the drive and the strength to actually pull it off. But they got rid of him, of course. The whole thing was stolen in the second election. But anyway, the point is, I did get interested in politics, so I was contemplating for many months now to start making videos on this subject. But I wasn't sure whether I should include them on this channel or make a separate one. But I've decided now that I can combine them both. Like, I see that media in general is moving in that direction. The thing is, there's the whole idea of, that Bible passage that says we fight not against flesh and blood, but against principalities and powers, that type of thing. This idea is, we're having a greater and greater critical mass building around this idea, and people are accepting it more and more. You'll be surprised as to the amount of people that actually understand. They have some, to a lesser or greater degree, they have some kind of awareness that something is going on beyond the physical, and that it's of a dark nature. So I find it completely congruent and not contradictory to, 1 minute talk about just mundane politics, and then literally the next minute talk about interdimensional dark entities without batting an eyelid, and hoping that most viewers will find it quite ordinary as well. And if they don't, well, I can't help them with that. But that's where the world is heading. Because I considered this, I contemplated it for many months. I thought, what am I going to do here? I'm becoming more and more drawn to YouTuber formats that are like Michael Knowles, that kind of thing. The conservative guy from America, Michael Knowles. And I'm thinking, I really like what this guy's doing. I want to do something like this. It was just, I always follow my whatever I do is a labor of love, okay? Aside from just doing crappy jobs in the past to have to pay the bills, everything else is because I love doing it, and I feel like there's a mission, there's a greater mission to it, and it has to do with contributing to the greater good, and so on. It's never for financial purposes, although that might be part of it. Obviously, that would be secondary or third to it. The initial thing is, am I attracted to this? Do I really want to do this? Do I enjoy doing it? So I'm just naturally attracted to it. So I thought, what am I going to do? Combine, be like Michael Knowles meets David Icke in one. How am I going to work it out on a channel like this, where you find videos about the archons and stuff from a few years ago, and now suddenly I'm speaking about mundane political stuff. It's technically it should be two separate channels, right? But I thought, no, I'm just going to speak about everything on the one channel, because really, if you really think about it, all these things are ultimately connected. Okay, and if people don't really see that, eventually I might convince them, or some of them. Okay, because if you really connect the dots, you'll see that essentially everything is connected. But the fact that we can't see that, it's not God's fault, it's our fault that we haven't expanded our awareness enough to be able to see, to make the clear connections between the disparate elements. Okay, so let's get into the basic points of this virginal video, this first political video for this channel, and it's on a very important topic, because first of all, it's true and it's important and it needs to be discussed. Secondly, due to the loss of Orange Man, I've seen a lot of my friends on Facebook, practically, they're more or less depressed. They're very down. I can see they're very disappointed. I'm seeing it in their posts and their comments, etc. It's almost like they've lost hope, because they're thinking, if they were able to steal this and get away with it, what else could they possibly get away with? It begs the question, and I understand why they would be thinking this, because it's like, is there a limit? Is there a limit? Are they completely above the law? Okay? So, it's very important to explain to people the best way I know, and in my own words, the best way I can. I mean, this is not secret, groundbreaking information. Many people have discussed this, but I'm just going to give my own take on it. Basically, the whole crux here is that the left, and this has always been the case historically, not just now, the left is designed to always self-destruct. Always, always, always. It happened back in the day when it was Nazis versus communists, and the Marxists, the communists, technically lost. They probably didn't really, because then through the Frankfurt School, they maneuvered, they kind of did a bait and switch and kind of changed their tune, or clothed it with other terminology, but at the core it was the same Marxist communist ideas, but it morphed into the ideas that were developed in the Frankfurt School in the wake of the rise of the Nazi Party. They thought, okay, we need to change, modify our ideas, our approach slightly, and then it was this whole thing of the long march through the institutions, which began roughly around the 60s, and 50, 60 years later now, we have the majority of university positions, mass media, and so on in the West, basically infiltrated by people that would call themselves communists or close, if not outright communists. They are much more to the left than they are to the right. They tilt much more to the left than they do to the right. I mean, this is known. It's known that the percentage of leftist or left-leaning professors in Western universities, what I mean, Western, Northern Europe and Anglosphere and US, those territories, because here in Greece it's not that bad. I could make a whole series of videos. I could make an entire channel. I was thinking of doing that, actually, starting a separate channel promoting Greece to the world. We're kind of immune to this. It's a unique thing about this culture we have here. It's kind of like the kryptonite to all this Marxist bullshit, but that's another topic. I'll get into it perhaps another time if I have to. But in the aforementioned nations, it's very bad. These idea pathogens have almost completely taken over. Idea pathogens, the term created by the admirable Gadsad. So we are at a point now where everything in the West mirrors almost exactly the situation that we had 100 years ago in the 1920s. Okay? The right is gaining ground because the conservatives are getting more and more they're getting aggravated, I guess. It's basically a feeling of enough is enough, because all the left does is just keeps pushing and pushing and pushing. Okay, I'll explain a bit later. Well, I'm going to switch. I'm going to change scenes and go to the whiteboard a bit later on. I'll do some more, get more into depth about the dynamics of left versus right, which is basically yin versus yang. So yeah, speaking of that, the next point here is that left and right are the political manifestations of yin and yang, essentially. A lot of people know this, some people have not considered it, but it is true. It has been discussed by many others, but it bears mentioning, right? It's very important to point this out, to reiterate it, because yin is the feminine element, yang is a masculine element. So there's feminine, masculine, and basically it's just a never-ending, well, I don't want to use the word struggle, but it kind of is. Okay, so there's this, and it repeats through history in cycles. Now 100 years later, we're in a very, very similar situation that we had in the 1920s. Okay, the rise of the so-called far right. Essentially, it's just the yang energies of the world as these are expressed through the political lens are basically rising up, because even the most peaceful, gentle dog, if you're constantly kicking it and abusing it and yelling at it, it's going to bite you. It's going to get up and bite you. It's going to kick your ass. Okay, so that's the problem with the left today. It's not always the case. I mean, it was not the case 20, 30 years ago. It wasn't that bad, but they always progressively become more and more radical / insane. I mean, it's a insane is a harsh term, but at the ends of the spectrum, like at the very far left, they're basically insane. Because if you look at the stuff that they say and they do, you're like, all right, this literally, according to the clinical definition of insanity, these people are not well. They actually, it's like a form of mass psychosis or something. But whatever it is, I'm not a psychologist, but I've studied it. I've studied the subject a bit. So I do understand basic psychology, and it's quite clear that there's just something wrong with the people on the very far ends of the left spectrum. Okay. Also, an interesting thing to be aware of is the Kabbalistic tree of life, and how the masculine and the feminine elements are portrayed on that. The tree of life is like a map of the universe, a map of creation, okay? And everything can be explained on it, both macrocosmic and microcosmic elements, as in human psychology and behavior, plus macrocosmic, astrological, planetary, universal themes, all right? So we have two columns in the tree of life. the column, the left one, sorry, it's the right one. When the tree of life is superimposed on the human body, it will be your right hand, but technically it's the left side of the tree when you're looking at it from the front. It's the pillar of severity, and the right side of the tree is the pillar of mercy. Now the pillar of severity is actually the feminine one, and the pillar of mercy is the masculine. So, and I'll explain a little bit more on it. So I ended up having to use the whiteboard. I made a little section that was just an image of the tree of life and some audio, but it didn't work out with some technical difficulties, so I'm at my whiteboard earlier than I expected. So I've drawn a rudimentary picture here, a diagram of the tree of life. There are 10 spheres beginning from number 1. I've only inputted the numbers and I have not named them or color-coded it or anything. It's nothing fancy. I've put the spheres from 1 to 10. Number 1 corresponds to Prime Creator, to the highest Godhead, and the 10th sphere corresponds to the Earth realm, to the 3D, so it's the lowest point of creation, and in between there are other levels. The tree is basically a map of the universe, both the macrocosmic and the microcosmic universe. As in macrocosm, the planets, the seven classical planets of astrology, beginning from Saturn to Jupiter, to Mars, to the Sun, to Venus, to Mercury, and to the Moon. Okay, those planets correspond to those spheres, and in general, it pretty much explains every mystical and spiritual tradition known to us. It's like a Rosetta Stone of spirituality. You can map it onto anything and it'll make sense. And the microcosm would be human psychology. It explains the best way that I have ever seen anywhere. The correlation, the correspondences between the planetary energies and the psychological archetypes and so on. So that's where we get astrology from, and so many other things. The tarot also corresponds with the pathways between. There are 22 possible pathways between the 10 spheres, which correspond to the 22 major arcana cards of the tarot, and correspondences just go on and on. So that was a bit of a brief intro to what the Tree of Life is, and why it's so crucially important to anybody who's even rudimentarily interested in spirituality and so on. So, among other things, it also explains the right and the left, which is, the left is yin, the right is yang, as we know. So there are 3 pillars. Aside from the 10 spheres, there are also 3 pillars on the Tree of Life. The middle one, which is spheres 1, 6, 9 and 10, which goes straight from the highest sphere with a straight line down to the earth plane. So this sphere 6 corresponds to the Sun, sphere 9 corresponds to the Moon. So it goes highest Godhead, the midpoint, which is the Sun, and then the Moon, and then the Sun reflects its energies onto the Moon, and then the Moon reflects it finally, the highest God force energies down to the earth plane. So that's the middle pillar, and the pillar on the right is the pillar of mercy, which corresponds to Yang, as it says there, and then the pillar of severity, which corresponds to Yin. It's a funny anecdote, interesting anecdote. Back in the day when I was a relative newbie at this stuff, and I didn't know the exact details of correspondences, and I didn't know like the associations and the basic names and colours and all that stuff off by heart, which I do now finally. It takes a bit of study to learn this, but in the beginning, in the early days,
when I was getting more and more interested in this stuff, I assumed, because the left pillar is called the pillar of severity, I automatically assumed that it was the one that corresponded to the masculine, to the yang. And I watched a video once, I'll never forget this. I watched a YouTube video where a guy was saying, well, the left pillar is the feminine one and the right one is the masculine. I'm thinking, masculine one, but this side is all about, you know, kindness and giving and all that. It kind of feels like a feminine energy, you know, this motherly, giving, kind energy, okay? So I thought, you know, I became a bit stubborn and self-righteous. I thought, no, that's these guys don't know what they're talking about. You know, they don't know their stuff, so they shouldn't be uploading videos if they don't know what they're saying. So that day, most of that day, or the big part of that day, I researched it to death. I watched several videos. I just Googled it and saw articles and excerpts and books, PDFs I found online and everything you can imagine. And the more I kept reading, the more I kept researching, the more I kept realizing, well, the left-hand pillar, the pillar of severity, is the feminine / yin one, and therefore it would correspond to the political left. Okay. An interesting thing also, I saw a guy once on YouTube saying he was trying to, like, his theory was that because sphere 4 here corresponds to Jupiter, and the planet Jupiter is the most expansive, most positive planet, and sphere 5 here, which is its opposite, corresponds to Mars, which, as many people know, is the planet of war and the archetypal masculine planet and so on. So especially because of due to that, I thought, well, that makes perfect sense. You know, this pillar must be the masculine one since Mars is here. But I thought, how can Jupiter, does that mean Jupiter is feminine? Or Venus, this sphere 7 here, corresponds to the planet Venus. So, you know, on the surface, it makes sense on some level. It makes sense that this side could correspond to the political right, and this side could correspond to the political left, because we have Jupiter here who's giving, and Mars who's warlike, and hence it is associated with masculinity and conservatives / Republicans who are more into building up the military and so on, and a war hawk-ish, okay? But that's if we're talking strictly just these two spheres, okay? And also the color coding, I know that I said that I was going to include the colors, so don't make it overly complex for someone who's never studied this. But just briefly, as a lot of people again would know, Mars, sphere 5, the color coding is red, okay? The color of that sphere and of the Martian energy in general corresponds to red. The sphere of Jupiter corresponds to blue. And when we say sphere, we don't mean the planet. The sphere is like a higher vibration energy, the God force, the God energy, the divine energy that actually births, eventually births what we see as a physical planet, the sphere. But so it's on a higher, spheres are on a higher vibration, they're higher on the food chain, let's say, okay? So, but they all have planetary correspondences and astrological ones and so on. So we have Jupiter here, which is blue, the sphere of Jupiter, which is blue, sphere of Mars, which is red. So I thought, okay, red, blue, Democrats, yin, Republicans / yang. But then if you look at the sphere, at the pillars as a whole, all the three spheres, this one is actually yin because restrictive. See, because up here, the third sphere corresponds to Saturn. Saturn, which is the most restrictive planet, okay? So Saturn, that's an astrological glyph of Saturn there. And over here, second sphere, we have, well, depending on who you ask, it may or may not correspond to a particular planet, but it's my opinion that we could attribute Uranus to it, because the three outer planets could be attributed to the levels beyond Saturn. Okay, so Saturn, so the planetary matrix starts here, and it's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, ending at the moon, and then there's the Earth. But then beyond here, I guess, you know, many people, many Kabbalists have said we can have postulated that we can put Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. So Saturn is the top planet / sphere on the pillar of severity. Okay, and then we have Mars, and then we have Mercury, which is impersonal, cold planet, because Mercury is all about logic and intellect. Okay, so the characteristics of the pillar of severity, this closely mirrors the yin. Okay, negative. Now, negative in a sense, not in a derogatory sense, but you know, like magnetic energy, electric energy. Yang is positive, giving, kindness, expansive, and force, as opposed to negative, receiving, severity. And when we say severity, you know, a lot of people, you'll see online, there's a lot of discussions about this. People that are yet beginner or intermediate in the Kabbalistic studies, they question whether this pillar really should be the feminine one and this one really should be the masculine one, because it's kind of flipped, because on the whole, as pillars, they do correspond very closely with what we have here. So on the whole, the pillar of severity does match up with yin, and on the whole, this pillar matches with yang very well. But then when we look at the planets individually, we look at Mars here, you're like, what on earth is Mars doing on the pillar that corresponds to yin, when Mars is the most yang planet of all of them? Okay, and by the same token, what the hell is Jupiter doing here, the sphere 4, when Jupiter mirrors very closely the maternal, no, not 100%, but there are a lot of, you could liken a lot of the traits of Jupiter to the loving, giving mother energy, okay? Though not always, because technically the great mother archetype is supposed to be Saturn. So again, it fits that the mother, the feminine, is on this side. But you know, if one has not studied this stuff at a certain level of depth, the confusion is understandable. So, you know, there's people that assume and teach others, that erroneously teach others, that this side is a Republican one because of Mars here, and this side is a Democrat one. In truth, it's flipped. So my point here is, and this is a very, very important point, because this is the tree of life itself, the Kabbalistic tree of life itself, which is the mother of all. It's like the ultimate map of the universe, the Rosetta Stone of spirituality. Okay, so if the tree of life says it, it's legit. Okay, that's why it's very important to mention it here. So, you know, kind of giving, explaining politics through a metaphysical angle. You know, I'm going to be doing that a lot from now on this channel. So it's not going to be just straight politics, as I said, like in the first 5 or 7 minutes of the video. So we have basically the yang, the right wing, being the positive faction because it is giving, expansive. It's electrical energy, so it's creative. See, it's creative. It's basically the entrepreneurial, the business-like people are attracted to this side. That's the kind of energy that the right wing holds. It's like business, corporate, creation, whether it's sort of businesses or just of civilization in general, and so on. This side receives, see, giving, receiving, because you'd be forgiven for thinking, if you're a newbie, on first sight it's like, well, giving, that sounds like left wing, because you know, the socialist ideal of just giving stuff, giving people free shit. But if you really think about it, giving fits much better with the right wing, because the socialist way of doing things is, of course, to give stuff to people, but the stuff, the abundance, the money has to come from somewhere, right? So it comes from the right. It comes from the conservatives / Republicans. I mean, in America they're called Republicans, but let's just say the right wing in general. In any country of any era, whenever it's been this side in power, it just builds and creates and so on. So basically this side creates wealth in various forms, but in a big way, you know, purely in a monetary sense, but in many other ways too. And this side takes the wealth and redistributes it, redistributes the wealth, okay? So this side gives it to this side takes it and redistributes it. Why can't I say that word? I usually never had a problem with it. Redistributes, there you go. Yes, so I hope this explains in a much better way the true difference between left and right, and why this side is actually the positive one and the benevolent one. Because see, this side is playing a bit of a trick on us. They're like, oh, we're the kind side and the understanding, the caring one and so on, because we give free stuff to people. Do you? Where do you get the free stuff from? Who gives it to you? Do you just go like that, with your magic wand, and it comes out of nowhere? Where do you get the stuff? These guys create the work, okay? There's the abundance, the wealth, the industry is from this side, and it goes there, so it's funneled onto this side constantly. Okay, so it's like this, right, left. So the right gives its productivity, its energy to the left, and then the left redistributes, here we go again with that word, redistributes it to society, and then it ends up becoming zero, because they just exhaust everything. It's like the rich successful father that's got just like a trust fund kid that's never worked a day in his life, and basically just keeps giving him money, and this guy just keeps partying and so on, and eventually at 30 ends up with nothing. So then the right wing comes to power again, and again the cycle begins, and they build up again, and then they give it to them, you know, because when the right is in power, taxes go down, productivity up. When these guys come into power, taxes go up, productivity initially goes up, but then by the time they're done, it's down, and then these guys come back in again and restart the machine, okay? So that's basically how it works. That's the way I've understood it anyway. Hopefully it's going to make sense to a lot of people. Let me know in the comments and so on. I hope this helped shed some light, some much needed light, on this never-ending debate between left and right. So,
well, look at that. I'm magically back on the couch. Isn't technology amazing? Okay, so I hope that helped, that little segment about the tree of life and how it explains, well, it better explains the metaphysical elements behind the political left and political right. So essentially, in the political sense of yin and yang, I'm not talking men and women or anything, strictly in the political sense, yang builds and yin destroys, or yang produces and yin takes, okay? Like I said in the clip, the Kabbalah clip earlier, that's perfectly reflected in the way that they view taxes, which to me, the left's understanding of tax is completely insane and unworkable. I just do not understand it. But then I'm a very yang individual. It just doesn't make sense to me anymore. Practically none of their policies, not 100% of them, but a very large percentage just don't add up. So, okay, yang builds up, yin destroys. The right builds up, the left destroys. However, each faction is necessary. This is the thing. We can never get, well, we can get a situation where a leftist totalitarian government rises up, or a far right totalitarian government rises up, and we saw this. We saw that example. We don't want to see it again. We might see it again, but we don't want to. But we saw it about 100 years ago with Nazi Germany on the one hand and communist Russia on the other. I mean, there are people that will tell you that the Nazis were technically left because it was socialist. They were basically socialists, really. But socialists that were very nationalistic. Okay, so their only socialist elements were elements that had to do with taking care of their own people, but everything else essentially fits in perfectly with essentially everything that the far right of any country and any era has espoused. Okay, so the communist government in Russia was the complete opposite. They were polar opposite forces. But at the end of the day, what I and many others have observed is that unfortunately the leftist totalitarian, like the yin totalitarian government / society is far worse. This is why I had to include the stuff with that little segment before about the tree of life and how the two pillars correspond with the two broad strokes of the political spectrum, because there's not just two factions. You know, broadly there's just yin and yang, and the majority of people just fall mostly on one side and mostly on the other, and that's where we get, you know, the stereotypes from, gender stereotypes or political stereotypes when we're talking yin and yang in terms of politics. But really, every single person that's been political, every single politically active person that's ever lived, that is currently living, pretty much has their own unique ideas. You can't put a person in a little box and say, okay, you're alt-right, you're alt-left, you're centre-left, or centre-right, or this and that. You know, it doesn't really, no single individual is the same, okay? So that's the thing. But broadly, in general, in the aggregate, overall, blah, 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 roughly speaking, as Jordan Peterson says, it can be divided in the right and the left, which is the yin and yang. So history has shown us that when the yin goes absolutely crazy and the far left takes over a society, the destruction is far worse than it could ever have been in its polar opposite incarnation. Okay, like in a fascist far right scenario. Okay, and the problem here is that the entire narrative all over the place in the Western world is the exact opposite to this truth. Even though we've seen it with our own eyes, that when the totalitarian left takes over, the casualties are far worse, life is much worse, conditions, everything, all conditions of life, the way the entire infrastructure just functions, it breaks down. There's no efficiency, there's no quality, there's no sense of meritocracy and productivity, because they're anti-hierarchy, you see, because the right, the yang is the hierarchy and the yin is the anti-hierarchy. That's the whole point of the far right and of communism. Okay. Unfortunately, the communists think they're always right because they think that the hierarchy is oppressive. It can be. It tends towards becoming tyrannical and oppressive, but it's not oppressive in and of itself. Okay, competence hierarchies are not necessarily dictatorships. They're not tyrannical in and of themselves. Okay, so we need both, because you can't, even though the totalitarian left societies are far worse out of the two options, out of the two broad options, the totalitarian right government is not the greatest thing on earth either. All right, so we do need both. When the right becomes too rigid, and you get like the 1% of the 1% owning everything at the top, and then there's essentially no middle class left. Basically, I'm repeating a lot of Jordan Peterson isms here. His fans would already know what I'm talking about here, but it bears repeating. The Pareto principle basically gone haywire, gone to the maximum degree, and getting to the point where there's no middle class, and basically there's just one tyrant and his bootlickers at the top, and then everyone else is basically a slave. Okay, this is like the far right totalitarian society gone to the absolute limits. Okay, that's as worse as it can get. So that's where you need the reactionary, the Bolshevik factions, that type of thing, to bust that up, so they can. It's like a seesaw. Okay, so if the right goes too much, goes too crazy, then the left comes in, jumps on top, and then it balances again. But usually, the left just won't freaking stop. They just don't stop, because they just have this idea that any hierarchy that's ever existed and will ever exist is just evil by default. Okay, so that's a big problem. I used to believe that also. Like I said, that's why I said that when I was younger. I guess I was more on the left than on the right. It's just I'm just looking at the beliefs that I had, and I'm thinking, yep, okay, yep, ticking this, ticking that point, that box, yep, they all fit. But when you examine these things logically and pragmatically and look at life, you examine real life situations, you think, well, no, not really. I've been part of hierarchies, of competence hierarchies in my life. A person could say this hypothetically, right? You say, well, I've seen competence hierarchies in various walks of life where people at the top were absolutely wonderful people and very benevolent and not power hungry and not oppressive. They were actually the opposite. Okay, they used their power and influence in an Arthurian sense. Okay, like to serve the community and the world rather than to oppress. So, but the bottom line here is that, as Peterson often says, the only way to have a healthy and balanced society is to have constant dialogue. Dialogue and compromise, because compromise will come through dialogue if both parties are reasonable and logical. Compromise will result. Okay, you can't always get what you can't have the right getting always what it wants, and you certainly cannot and would not want the left to always get what it wants. Otherwise, it would be like the worst, absolutely worst apocalyptic nightmare society if that happens. But yeah, it'll be bad on both sides. It's just that I'm particularly against the leftist totalitarian society, because I enjoy looking at reality and judging by the facts and what history has shown us, and not on what I would have wished was true, or on ideology alone, or opinion, or assumptions, or feelings. Okay, you just, here are the facts. This is the kill count of the communists. This is the kill count of the far right, of the fascists. You weigh it up, and it's just obvious. Because the communist kill count has been about, what, 10 times bigger? We don't need any more. We've had enough deaths from that side. There's just this murderous, there's just a murderousness, like there's an innate desire for genocide with a lot of these people. But I'm talking about the extreme, on the extreme ends. I'll show you in a bit when I go to the whiteboard, that little diagram I've already prepared. They just think that it's justified to get rid of whatever their ideology, their Marxist ideology, has convinced them. That idea pathogen of idea pathogens has convinced them that needs cleansing, let's say. For instance, getting rid of intellectuals, getting rid of, like how they got rid of the kulaks in Russia 100 years ago, approximately. Okay, basically the productive people. See, the totalitarian left, when it gets to power, due to its ideology, to that particular idea pathogen that it runs on, it believes that it has to destroy the strong, has to eliminate the strong. Okay, so genocide's the strong. The far right, like the Nazis did, they go on a eugenic premise, and they want to eliminate the weak. So one side is dysgenic, the other side is eugenic. So both are bad, but being dysgenic is slightly worse, because they're both going to destroy, but at least, you know, the eugenic side is like, well, it's quite reptilian. I mean it both in a psychological and mundane sense and in a metaphysical sense, like as in, you know, reptilians, greys, all that stuff. Because it's still the New Aeon 2012 YouTube channel. It's not going to change. The metaphysical stuff I'm always going to be discussing. So both are reptilian in nature, because it's the extreme ends, basically. So the fight or flight is what's in control ultimately, on the extreme ends of the left and right political spectrum. Okay, then both are crazy people. Whoever are the tyrants that end up taking over in either of these two versions of totalitarianism. But with communism, it's just, to me, it's just 3 times as worse. I was going to say 10, but technically, like, it's twice or 3 times as worse, basically. because at least the other guys, they don't touch the productive people, okay? So the society, see, because that's the whole point. It's an extreme of masculinity, okay? It's like a toxic masculinity, basically, going out of control and taking over a country or the world, you know, country or continent or the world, okay? So the communist template of a society would be a toxic femininity basically taken over. That's what they are, these two. So we saw that, like I said, about 100 years ago. We saw that with Europe and Russia, and we don't want to see it again, but it might happen, because the problem is, as I was saying a bit earlier, the key is to have dialogue. If we don't want to devolve again into a World War II 2.0, like the World War II of the 21st century, or World War III, we need to have this dialogue. We just have to. There has to be constant dialogue, and there does need to be two factions, you know, roughly speaking, okay, because it's not just two, but whatever, in a broad sense, it's basically divided into two yin and yang like ideologies and groups. So there has to be constant dialogue. Politics is just one aspect of life. It has to happen between men and women. The universe itself is a constant interplay of yin and yang, whether you look at it on the most mundane level, in a Malkuthian level, on the lowest sphere of the tree of life here on Earth in a 3D realm, or on the highest, just before the point where duality completely disappears and there's complete unity up on the highest realms. Basically, there's always like a version of yin and yang type of interplay going on, even on the highest of spheres, okay, of creation, right? So we need to mirror what the universe does, as above, so below, okay? So if we don't reenact this interplay between yin and yang down here in real life, like between men and women, between the right and the left, between different opposing cultures, there has to be a dialogue. I mean, that's why the art of diplomacy even exists, why diplomats have jobs, okay? We need dialogue and discussion between differing factions. But since this is about politics, we'll focus on the political aspect. So the issue is, they don't want to have dialogue. The left, as many people have been saying, and many people can see, an increasingly larger and larger number of them just do not want to have dialogue. Why this is so, I can make thousands of hours of video. I'm trying to explain it, trying to unpack it. No one fully knows, but the closest we've gotten to understand it essentially is that because they're just becoming more and more extreme in the past 10 years or so, and basically the Overton window just grows, and what was considered radical 10 or 20 years ago is now seen as the norm. So always the radical factions keep expanding the Overton window, and then eventually the entire party, that entire side of the political aisle, becomes infected with idea pathogens that were initially considered fringe by even their own contemporaries. You know, give it 10 or 20 years and now everyone subtly is believing the stuff that were considered crazy 20 years ago by most people on the left. Okay. So that's more or less the process. That's just a simplistic way of putting it. But then also you have all this postmodernism stuff today in critical race theory. So that's like adding more to the mix. And the idea pathogen becomes, you know, when the poison would take maybe 8 hours to kill you, you would have it and then you'd wake up dead in the morning. It would take about 8 or 10 hours to work. Now with postmodernism and critical race theory in the mix, it kills you instantly. Well, maybe in about 30 minutes if you're strong enough, like Rasputin, who needed about 7 or 8 bullets to take him down. So, but seriously, it's gotten really bad. It's gotten really bad, and a lot of us that are discussing this thing on the internet, we're not being alarmist, we're not being paranoid, we're not being conspiracy theorists, even though I am a conspiracy theorist in general. But in this case, it's like we're just being pragmatic, and we're looking at what's happening, and we're just reporting on it. End of story. Now, as I said earlier on, in the first couch section, if a large chunk of a particular population chooses to not see something, it doesn't mean that it's not true. It just so happens that a lot of the people that are on the yin/left side of the political aisle think in a particular way, which precludes them, which just prevents them, that's a better word, prevents them from seeing certain things, which people that are not of that disposition seem to just be able to see these things, to perceive these things quite readily, very easily, like it's just an instant recognition. It's like, guys, you're anti-free speech, it's so obvious. Or you shouldn't be doing this and that, you know, you shouldn't be so anti-dialogue. You shouldn't censor so heavily. You shouldn't, you know, whatever. There's like about 4 or 5 key points. You can name endless stuff, but I have about 4 or 5 key points that the left, especially the crazy left, the radical left, has been engaging in the past 5-10 years or whatever, especially since Orange Man miraculously gained power for about 5 minutes and then they shot him down again. So they've completely lost the plot at this point, and I've written down these points on my little whiteboard, and we're going to go there now and check some other nifty, nice little stuff that I have there as well about the right faction, which interestingly, you know, if you look at word magic and you think about the metaphysical, you think of words in the English language in the metaphysical context, it makes you wonder, doesn't it? Why is the right called right? You know, it sounds and it is spelled exactly the same as the word which also means correct. Okay? It's not only that it sounds like it, even if it was spelled differently, like i.e. the political right, if it was spelled like R-I-T-E or something like that, the fact that the two words would have sounded identical when pronounced, that would have had a very important word magic effect. But even more so, the fact that they're actually spelled identically goes to show, in a collective unconscious, from a collective unconscious point of view, I guess. I mean, it's just a massive synchronicity basically telling us that, hey, guys, the universe is just saying, this is the faction that's more correct than not. Just like Ann Coulter says about the right and the left. Okay, so now we're going to go to my nice little whiteboard and continue. I've got here an illustration, a diagram of the yin, the left. This is the left, so this is the middle. It's the whole spectrum. So we have the left, yin/left, yang/right. Okay. So we have the moderates, the moderate right here, the moderate left over here, and most people are found in the center, and then as it goes more towards the left or more towards the right, the numbers become smaller and smaller, and then eventually you get to the point where, see, these are the radical factions here, you know, roughly speaking, in my estimation. So you end up like, this is like the crazy people on the far right, this is the crazy people on the far left, radicals, okay? So percentages don't really matter here, we're not talking specific numbers. I don't really know what the percentages would be, no one probably knows. But you get a rough idea here, and you know, also some other term, a couple of other terms: chaos, order, destroy, build, okay? So the right builds, the right is order, the left destroys, it's chaos. Look at the riots, look at BLM, Antifa, okay? They attack unprovoked. Okay, they believe in violence for violence's sake because they have these ideas, these idea pathogens instilled in their minds, in their empty minds, that these guys over here, if they were given the chance, they would put everyone in concentration camps and blah blah blah. So they have these ideas that there's always a Nazi around every corner. Like, if you give the right a chance, if you give them half a chance, they're just going to become Nazis. They're just naturally going to do that. Okay, it's just they think everyone is a white supremacist and etc. etc. Like every logical person, if someone says, well, I think part of a country being an actual country is actually having borders, that's a completely reasonable thing. It has always been a reasonable thing to say. It is a reasonable thing to say right now, this moment, and it will always be a reasonable thing to say, but these people just don't, the people that are somewhere here don't seem to understand that, okay? So now, the characteristics. And by the way, the whole point of this video is to demonstrate that why the left will eventually destroy itself, and it always destroys itself. It always destroys itself, and here in the final segment it explains why it will eventually destroy itself, because like I said early on when I was on the couch, I've just noticed a lot of my friends on the right, they've just been very disappointed. Like they're pretty much, some of them are despondent, like practically depressed, okay, at the fact that Orange Man was booted out through illegal, unfair means. Okay, I don't want to get into that one because apparently we're not supposed to speak truth about certain issues on YouTube, but whatever. Practically everyone knows that that's what happened. But this is my attempt at showing, first of all, showing people, you know, giving them some more insight on how the left and right operate, and particularly why the leftists are the way they are, and also to end on the good news. Okay, I want to spread the good news. I want to spread the gospel, ladies and gentlemen, that the left will never gain the power that it desires to gain. It just does not ever work that way. Like, even in the Soviet Union, they thought it was the most amazing utopian idea. Marx was their god. In their stupid atheist minds, Marx was their god, and Marxism their religion. But then the dream crumbled like a sand castle, didn't it? Like, they didn't expect that it would crumble so badly. But if something is based on false axioms that are inherently against natural laws, or you could say and not in a strictly religious sense, but in an archetypal, just mystical, metaphysical sort of approach to the matter, you could say it's satanic. Okay, so these are satanic axioms that they hold, because if you want to destroy the people that are productive, how is that not satanic? Okay, so I should have put also atheist. This is the atheist side, broadly, not all of them, but you know, as it goes more towards the radical elements, it becomes more and more atheist. And this side is, you know, let's say the religious. I mean, the religious right, in my opinion, is fucking crazy. They're as crazy as the craziest elements that you would find here. And I wouldn't know, I mean, if I had a choice between the two, I'd just flip a coin, like, as to who, like if I was in some situation where, you know, stranded in some place in the middle of nowhere where there were only like extra radical far leftists and radical religious right people to hang out with, I'll be like, oh no, I don't want to associate with either of these people, none of these people, okay? But you know, like I said throughout the entire video, I keep saying over and over that I'm more on this side. Now, the characteristics of, like the worst characteristics, the most important ones that are causing the trouble in the past, I don't know, 5-10 years especially, are these. First of all, they're convinced they are correct. Okay? Convinced is correct. The person is convinced they're correct. They have these atheistic, for the most part, ideas which are not axioms at all. I mean, to them they are axiomatic. They think they are axiomatic truths, but they violate every single natural law you can imagine. It's never going to end well, right? So you can't be saying that, you know, you think that by destroying all the productive people in society, for example, I'll give you, you know, one of the key things they believe is that, so we'll run with that. They believe that if a faction or a person believes that, then there's no way that they are correct. You cannot be correct. Like if you destroy, I mean, the productive elements of a society, if we go by the Pareto principle, right? The 80-20, which is the 80-20 principle, which, I mean, I know a lot of people already know this, but for those who don't, 20% of the people in a society, roughly, in any setting in life, do 80% of the work. Okay, so if you take out the productive, what the hell's going to happen? You're going to get rid of 80% of anything that is produced in a society, whether it's the food, the art, anything. Because the communists, they don't just take out the farmers and stuff, the producers. The first thing they do when they go in is they start killing all the intellectuals. What the hell is up with that? You know, so it's just a very twisted, satanic ideology, because it goes against this stuff, it just basically goes against natural law / God, okay, against nature. That is just it. There's two kinds of people, broadly speaking, in the world. People that understand what I just said, and people that just don't see it. You know, there's no two ways about it. There's no other way to go about this. You can't just say, well, maybe you're wrong. Maybe that's just your opinion. Well, if you want to prove me wrong as to what I said here about the Pareto principle and the fact that it's against natural law, against nature, to destroy the productive in a society, go. make a reply video, you know, debate me in the comments or whatever, if I choose to leave them on, because then if I get too many trolls, I'm going to eventually start having comments off, but for now we'll leave them. So yeah, if they're convinced they're correct, and they're not, already we have a problem. So it starts, that's how trouble starts. They think they're right, when in reality they're against anything that's good and true and proper and godly, okay? I mean, the fact that you know someone's effed up is basically that they're atheist, or that generally the core of the ideology, you know, tends more towards atheism than not. I mean, Marxism was outright an atheist ideology, okay? So then, because of this, a corollary to this, if you know that you're right, you're convinced you're right, and the other side is completely wrong, it's more likely than not that you're going to refuse to debate. So this is why these people refuse to debate, because they're like, you know, I'm not going to speak to those Nazis. Why would I do that? You know, it's beneath me. Or whatever, or however they rationalize it. As pretty much anyone who has a channel slash website slash, you know, Facebook presence or whatever, any social media presence like mine, as they'll know already, you just cannot bring people on as guests that are somewhere along this spectrum. I mean, if they're somewhere here, yeah, maybe, but then as it goes more towards there, the closer you get towards this end point here, the harder and harder it is to get them to come over and say, hey, what's up? Want to have a chat? No. Because then the postmodernism thing kicks in as well, as I was saying when I was on the couch there before, at the end. You throw in the postmodernism stuff into the mix, and it becomes all about, it's a zero-sum game, and it's about power. And these people don't believe in anything resembling axiomatic truths and natural laws and a priori truths that have existed before physical creation manifested, you know. So, in other words, to put it simpler, they don't believe in the laws of God. They don't think that there's any underlying foundation, like unchanging foundation to the universe. Okay, let's call it natural law, whatever, God, you know, God's laws. Okay, they literally do not think that any of that applies. So basically, you just make it up as you go along. Okay, as per the postmodernist idea. Okay, so it's a very dangerous mix. Now, how all these ideas have been mixed together, and we've created like this deadly package of you know, far leftists, Marxist, Bolshevik kind of ideas, with postmodernist ideas, and then you have the critical race theory garbage, which pretty much says, I mean, you can sum up the critical race theory ideology in one sentence, essentially. It will be something like, white people are oppressive and evil, they're innately oppressive and evil, and they will never stop being such. So therefore, okay, maybe two sentences. So therefore, all non-white people are obligated to take down the white man, and by doing so, actually, they would be doing something that will be for the greater good rather than against. So they think they're doing it for the good, because they're going by this fundamental, you know, the first axiom that they go by is that white man, evil, oppressive, Nazi, It's in his blood. It's always going to be like that. You're just born racist, born oppressive. You're always going to be like that no matter what. So, can't really change it. So, sorry. We're just going to have to eliminate you or lessen your power and influence in society in some way, in whichever way we can. And they do it. It's a multi-pronged attack. Okay, they do it in any way they can. But I have no doubt in my mind that the way this is going, I mean, we've seen it. It escalates. You can see the escalation. So the way it's going is eventually it's going to end up being cancelling people. Now they cancel people on Twitter and stuff, but it's not much of a stretch to go from that to actually cancelling people in real life, as in genocide. Okay, and the way people are these days, I mean, the masses are so stupid. The masses are dumber than they've ever been in the entirety of known history, of official history. Okay, this is a fact, definitely. So you have, they think they're right. They don't want to debate, like I said, and that's been made worse from the fact that you have this confluence of the postmodernist and the critical race theory garbage that was cooked up in the Frankfurt School by those guys there in Frankfurt School. You can Google them and check out who they were. They're on Wikipedia. So, of course, when a faction of people operate by these two dictums, I don't know if that's the right word, but you know what I mean. So they think they're right, therefore they refuse to debate anyone that's outside of their bubble. So, of course, then they would move to censor free speech. So this is why then they go and censor free speech, and these are the people like, heads of big tech companies and so on, and very unfortunately, 99.99% of big tech basically is centered in the most leftist place on earth. Very unfortunately. So this is why these ideas to these people, and they're not all here. These people, the Jack Dorseys of the world, they're not necessarily here. I mean, me and my posse, the people that are pretty much here, sometimes we can be a little bit too critical of these guys on this side. Not everyone is freaking totally far left, but the point is that because big tech is centered in California there, it's just these ideas, it's in the morphogenetic field itself in California. Like, I mean, I'm sure that even if I go and live there for a number of years, it's just going to infect me. It just infects you through osmosis, just by being in the place. I mean, I feel this now that I've returned to Greece in the past approximately 1.5 years. I've been back now, and every month I keep changing. I keep seeing that my energy changes because the morphogenetic field that's unique to this place and to this place alone, i.e. the geographical location that is currently known as Greece, it's just a unique vibration that is just reprogramming me in ways that, however I had been programmed in Melbourne, Australia for those 20-ish years, that is being slowly undone now. So that's like a real life recent example that I'm living currently. So it's the only reason I bring it up, to tell people how real it is. So especially the people that were born there, they're just immersed in that vibration, in that way of thinking. And Hollywood is also there. Okay, so all these institutions, Hollywood, big tech, there are others too, but those two in particular, because they're in that place geographically, there's something about the energies. Okay, certain place, like like Texas. Okay, Texas is the total opposite. I mean, it's just well known that it's the stronghold of conservatism, the red state. I mean, people are saying it's turning purple slowly, but I don't know. No comment. We'll discuss it another time, whatever. But this is what happens. So then that's why they censor the free speech, because like the big tech companies, this is how this whole conversation about LA and morphogenetic fields started, because we were talking about that. So they think it's the right thing to do. So the head of YouTube or whoever at YouTube or Twitter and so on makes a decision to unceremoniously delete someone without warning and technically doing it totally illegally, like completely violating the terms and conditions and stuff, and just flat out just getting rid of somebody's channel or account. I really don't I mean, I have that conspiratorial side, as you'll clearly see if you see watch earlier videos of this channel, but or my Facebook posts. But the older I get, the more pragmatic I try to become. I mean, we can't explain the world always through the conspiratorial viewpoint. Okay, you gotta try to eliminate the most mundane, simple explanation first. Okay, so the simplest explanation is that these people just think they're doing the right thing. Okay, taking it too far, taking it to the point where it's like, oh, Zuckerberg is an android, and look, people have pictures of him, how he looked when he was, 10 years ago or whatever, and how he looks now, that he basically looks like some kind of android thing. Yeah, it's fun to post these memes and speculate and have fun on Facebook, but I think it's just that they just don't get it. They're in the bubble. Like that very well-known interview of Jack Dorsey and that woman and Tim Pool on Joe Rogan, right? It was just so obvious to me when I watched that, and I watched it. I think I re-watched it. The second time I tried to be more careful to like really figure it out, and it was just so obvious the second time around that I'm thinking, these people, they just believe their own BS. That's the thing, okay? And sometimes, the people that are on this side, that are a bit, you can call them like the crazy religious right. Maybe they take it a bit too far with the criticisms of this side. So then that's how you get like all these accusations of it's a conspiracy and blah blah blah. But the truth is somewhere in the middle. It's a conspiracy in the sense that big tech does collude, because it's pretty much all of them are of a leftist mindset, like all the CEOs and the founders and CEOs and so forth have that collectively they have that same, they belong pretty much, it goes from there, from somewhere from here to here, okay? So, and they think that, like I said, convinced is correct. They really think that their way is their way or the highway. I mean, the right also, see, this is the difference with the right. We'll get to these points in a minute. The right knows it's correct because, see, F-A-C-T, facts. Because we don't go by ideology and preconceived ideas. We just go by what is, because it's a yang. That's how the yang operates. If you're a yang-oriented individual and you're energetically more yang than yin, you're going to be like this. You're going to be like, well, this doesn't make sense, so I'm not going to believe it anymore. I don't give a shit what I believed 5 minutes ago. The facts now are making me go in another direction. You just follow the facts. So this side is more objective, at least in its current incarnation. The way the right has, and the new right, or the alt-right even, let's call it. I mean, I'm sure people are going to label me alt-right, even though I'm not. But I mean, if you're not here these days, the people that are here assume that you're there. So, everyone's alt-right these days. So, might as well call myself alt-right just to troll people. Why not? I don't care. So, So they censor because they think they're improving the world by doing so, because it's like, oh, you know, we're going to get rid of these evil people that killed not even 10% of the amount of the total amount that communists killed in the past century. But hey, it's not that facts and numbers count, it's just what we think, you know, because it's okay to kill millions and millions of people in order to bring in our utopia. But when these people retaliate and they're like, hey, what are you doing? What you did in Russia, we don't want you to do it in Europe and then America and then Australia, you know. We're not going to let you continue the BS you did in Russia, the Bolsheviks, okay, in the 20s. So then Europe was like, okay, you know, the fascist factions in Europe, because it wasn't just Himmler and his boss, it was Mussolini and Franco in Spain, okay. So the right in Europe was like, no, we're not going to see this be replicated all around the world, because the communists, the Russian communists, 100 years ago, in their own manifestos and writings, like they openly publicized their bold plans to basically Bolshevize the entire earth. What they had accomplished in Russia, they wanted to emulate in Europe and then in America. They were saying this in their own publications. Okay, if people want to, they can comment underneath and I can provide links to it or whatever. You know, the publications are Googleable, are readily Googleable. You can find it in 2 minutes, okay? Find them. So, and also, other than, you know, they think they're correct, they refuse to debate, therefore, and then secondly, they censor free speech, which to them, see, they think, many times you hear from the left lately, the past few years, that, oh, well, free speech, you know, the right takes advantage of free speech because, you know, there should be certain things that shouldn't be allowed to be said. Okay, so they think that we, or the right, use the free speech thing as a loophole to, quote, radicalize people. Who am I radicalizing now with this video? How have I radicalized anyone to, you know, towards anything? You know, the fact that saying that this side killed far more people, the communists have killed far more people than the fascists have. That's true. You can Google it in 30 seconds. You can find it. In less than 30 seconds, you can find it in 10. Okay, so mentioning the facts is not radicalizing anybody. But unfortunately, the people that are like from around here to there, and it gets worse as you get closer to that point, they don't believe that. They don't think so. They think that free speech is a trick that the founding fathers played on us, and now that the right is using that trick in order to oppress everyone and to patriarchy everyone, okay, and to toxic masculine everyone. So, of course, number 4, and like I said earlier on the couch session, you can have millions. You can just keep going, all right? But these are basic 4 that I felt were most fitting, and that's a funny wordplay because only 4 could fit on the whiteboard, so they were the most fitting. A consequence of all the above is that you have to demonize the opposition, because if you believe that you're 100% right and that the filthy, redneck, deplorable people over here are going to eventually evolve enough to come to your side and see how nice and new age bullshitty our side is and wants to save the whales and the forests and all that, which, I mean, all kudos to my fellow Libran, Gordon Sumner, aka Sting, who wants to save the forests. I mean, what else would he want to do? Would you want to destroy the forests? No, that's quite psychopathic, right? Unless we actually really need to do something like that for our own survival. But if it's only about corporate greed, then no, don't destroy the forests, but save them instead. So I agree with that. I mean, but I'm kind of using it as a meme, you know, just sort of poking fun at the more extremist sort of behaviors of the left. Like, you know, like I have an auntie that literally said to me once, she's an animal lover, she loves cats and stuff, she's like a cat lady. She literally said to me once, she literally said this, she said, I hate people. Well, I don't know if she word for word said hate, but in so many words she basically said that she dislikes people, and she thinks that that animals are better than people because animals don't have, you know, like murderous thoughts and destructive thoughts and stuff, like, you know, they don't want to, like, animals never kill each other unless it's in self-defense and stuff like that. So it's one of these people that just believes that animals are better than people and people are just cruel and so on. I mean, I'm an animal lover. All my friends know this very well, especially dogs, horses, dolphins, you know, amazing. But to then say that, you know, people are scum, humans are scum, but animals are just great because they're pure and they don't have any murderous thoughts. You know, and then on a separate occasion, she told me once, she said, well, I'm not really political, but we were communist, my family. So, leftist upbringing, communist / leftist, you know, Greek communist type of household. And coincidentally at the same time, loves animals, hates people. So, it's part of the whole package. In general, you're going to find more of that attitude that I just described, of this real case scenario, here rather than here. I mean, over here we have crazy shit going on sometimes as well. But, you know, I kind of give them a pass sometimes because I'm not religious, but I do believe in the Supreme Being, of course, and it's not a belief. It's a knowledge. I know that the Supreme Being exists. I don't just believe it. So, like I said before, like if I was stuck in a place where there were just crazies on the left and crazies on the right to hang out with, I'd have to flip a coin. But if I had no coin, I'd probably say, well, okay, I'll hang out with these people because at least they comprehend that, you know, they have the necessary 3.5 points of IQ that's required to understand that there is a freaking Supreme Being, that all this that we see, this magnificence, is not completely accidental and random. God, you have to be so dumb to believe that. So they demonize, of course, they have to demonize the opposition because it just fits you know, each point goes into the other perfectly. Convinced is correct, therefore refuses to debate, of course, because what's the point of debating if you're completely right? Like, let's say you're dealing with difficult parents that are, I don't know, very old-fashioned and stuff, or whatever, or with a friend that's just, I don't know, like a low-rent person that's just a drug addict and stuff, a bit of a loser, and you just, like, there's no point, or like the hippie type of people that think that, you know, psychedelics and all that stuff are like a legitimate path to enlightenment. That's completely wrong, all of that. So, of course, you're not even going to discuss it with them. At some point you're thinking, well, it's just like speaking to a brick wall, you know, screw them. So this is what these people think. They're like, well, I'm not going to speak to those Nazis, how dare they? You know, the Nazis killed 10% of the amount of people that the communists killed, you know, that's 10% is way bigger than 100, didn't you know that? So that's what they think. So of course they're not going to debate. Why would you debate someone who's wrong, according to their warped, idea pathogen infested minds? So then of course you're going to have to censor the free speech of the person that you refuse to debate, because you're like, well,
they keep radicalizing more and more people on YouTube, and this is going to get out of hand, and oh my God, it's just spreading like this chain reaction. The point is they think that they need to save the world by censoring free speech. They believe that by sacrificing a little bit of free speech, that it's worth it, because at the end of the day they're saving the world from, they're stopping the radicalization of people by conservative YouTubers. Radicalization, all that really means is just people learning the truth and reason prevailing over emotions. Okay, but this is yin. So if you're on the left / yin, you mostly run on emotions, even if it's 51%, okay, of the time, because that's mostly, because it's over 50, it is mostly. So this is a problem. So this is why, by doing this, they keep agitating this side that builds, that creates order. They keep hitting and hitting and hitting and hitting, particularly against straight white males, cis white males. I still don't know what the term cis actually means. I Wikipedia'd it one day and my head just hurt. I don't really know. But the attack against straight white men in particular, white people in general, but the straight white men in particular, because these are the ones, the yang is the one that builds the structure. Eventually, even the kindest, most placid, friendliest, most non-aggressive dog, if you keep kicking it and spitting on it and abusing it and yelling at it, it's going to attack you, it's going to bite your leg, isn't it? So this is what's happening, and these people, though, this side does not understand that, because the idea pathogens that have taken over their brains tell them that these people are like Nazis waiting to happen, and what we have to do, what we have to constantly do is perpetually function as like a wall, as a repellent against that. So this is why you get that's like the whole Antifa ideology. It's like we need to, like they do preemptive strikes, like they attack preemptively. When this side protests, it is 99.9% of the time peaceful and civil and everything. These guys, when they protest, not all the time, but almost every time, all hell breaks loose. Okay, so violence and subversion and just burning and breaking things is just inbuilt in the whole philosophy of this side. Okay, on this side it's not. Okay, because order, chaos. Okay, that's why I wrote chaos there. So chaos is inherent in their whole way of thinking and acting. So eventually this side is going to say, okay, hang on, I've been patient again and again and again. Well, if you keep doing it, if you do it, if you hit me one more time unprovoked, I'm going to hit you back. And when I hit you back, it's like a little weakling going up to someone like Arnold Schwarzenegger and trying to act like a tough guy, or like the case of the classic case of like that tiny little mouthy dog, those little toy dogs, like going up to a gigantic, powerful dog and trying to act like the tough guy. And the big dog is like, come on, man, give me a break. Are you kidding me? Well, but sometimes people just don't get it. Like they mistake the civility of the other side as weakness. Okay, this is a mistake that the left always makes, and it's making it now. It's going to make it again. It did so 100 years ago, and it almost got its ass whipped by the fascist factions in Europe. I mean, Nazi Germany got this close to taking over the world, were it not for every other country that was not allied with them ganging up on them all at the same time. I would have been speaking German now, and I would have been listening. We would have had far better quality heavy metal and music in general. But our comedy would have been very bad, though, I must say. But you know, the left always underestimates the power of the right, because they take civility and order, and like the milquetoast conservatives that are pretty much from here to here, okay, who don't really cause much trouble, who are just polite, blah blah blah, you know, the nerdy conservative types that just do their job and are polite and don't want to cause trouble and don't go out and protest and agitate and burn stuff and hit people without being provoked and so on. They take that as a sign of weakness, but then you have this, a little segment, a section here that's like, wait, we need to fight this, because if we don't, it's just going to keep growing and growing and growing and growing, and it's going to swallow up all this faction, and then eventually this whole thing, which has become all radicalized now, is going to swallow up everything else. So then the entire thing will become, basically we will have like Russia, communist Russia 2.0 again, but in on a global scale, or like a China. That's a very similar template as well. But I mean, the Russian thing, because it all started there, basically use that as an example typically. So now we have the characteristics here, the four main characteristics of how the right basically behaves lately. Like, it hasn't always been like this. It's been close to this. I mean, the freedom of speech thing, as many watching already know, it's funny, this is kind of flipped. This is quite well known. Like, the freedom of speech thing used to be part of the left, but now because they've gained power through the long march through the institutions, suddenly they want to quell the free speech because it doesn't suit them, okay? Because through free speech we are given the power, we are given the means to expose them and to ruin their little game here that they're doing of trying to take over everything. So it's all about power and maintaining the power. See, in the beginning they wanted power, they got it. Now that they've got it, they want to maintain it, but to maintain it you have to suppress free speech, because otherwise you're going to lose it. So it flipped, because before it was the right, let's say, in the 50s and before that, who didn't like the idea of free speech. But now it's like this side has the freedom of speech on their side, not on their side, that they advocate for freedom of speech. And many people see this, like even someone as intelligent and educated as Jordan Peterson, who considers himself as being somewhere here, slightly more to the right, but quite moderate. He's pretty much in the center, but probably about there, right? So I'm kind of there too. Oh, maybe I'm here, right? A little bit more, but pretty much on that side. Most people are pretty much in this vicinity. Big percentage of the people that these guys think are alt-right are typically just here. So first of all, as I touched on slightly a bit earlier, this side is not convinced it's correct. It knows it's correct because it has the facts. Okay, we got like the typical the Shapiro thing, right? Ben Shapiro. The facts don't care about your feelings type of thing. So that's generally the idea here. So okay, so you're correct because you go by verifiable facts. that are proven by mathematics, which is also racist and is also patriarchy. Number 2, thrives on discussion. Instead of refusing to debate, my side here, the right side, as in the correct side, thrives on discussion. Okay? Number 3, instead of censoring free speech, as I said before, advocates. We are advocates of free speech. Now, I don't know how long this is going to last for. I mean, when we regain power again and the balance flips over again to this side, you know, perhaps in 50 years from now or something like that, the right again is going to start censoring the free speech gradually. These things happen gradually as one faction gains power, then they want to maintain it, and by maintaining it, by having to maintain it, you're going to have to stifle freedom of speech bit by bit by bit. So, and the more radical elements of a particular side of the aisle are the ones that push for that, for the killing of freedom of speech. In this case, it's these guys now. One fine day, it might become these, but for now, this side is advocating for freedom of speech. So I give that a thumbs up, as do many other people. Demonize this opposition, okay, the left, as we know. Because I'm a fair person, try my best to be, anyway. This side, we criticize based on data and not assumptions, for the most part. I mean, like I said, the religious right, well, they talk, there's some crazy talk that comes out of this side sometimes. You know, some of the outlandish conspiracy theories about the left and so on, which they're not all true. A lot of them, some of them are true, but sometimes it just goes too far. But much more than this side, we criticize based on data, not assumptions. Like for the overwhelming majority of people that are on this side, typically we criticize based on data because yang. We are of a yang-ish disposition, right? So we conduct ourselves in that manner in general in life. It's not just a political thing. I mean, your politics are just a reflection of who you are in general in life. So if you're of a yang disposition, mostly of a yang disposition, you're going to tend to criticize people on data, which is basically on logic. You go on a logical, you function with logic as your main driving force in life, in whatever you do. I mean, it's not that we're emotionless androids, but it's just a percentage game, right? Okay, so maybe 65% of the time you let your logic prevail versus giving 35% leeway to the emotions. Whereas this side, you know, on average, maybe they're like 60-40 emotions logic. So the emotions are slightly override, because not everyone is an insane leftist over here. But in the aggregate, if you add up every single person that belongs anywhere on this spectrum, if you put it all together, you might find that, you know, 60, 65%, 70% of the time, when seen together as a collective entity, and how that entity impacts the planet, they would be, you know, 60 or 70% of the time acting on emotional impulses. Whereas this side, conversely, will be doing the same, but with reason, with logic. Okay, this is why Jordan Peterson is, and that's why I bring him up a whole lot, because that's why he's such an interesting person, because he's a psychologist. He sees all this stuff through the lens of a highly trained psychologist. Some of these things that I mentioned today, I pretty much got it from him. It's fascinating to see him break this stuff down, because he basically says, well, all the psychological, the data on psychology shows us that the left basically roughly speaking, runs on emotion. You know, even if it's 55% of the time, even if it's 50.1% of the time, but it wouldn't be. It would be much more than that. But I'm just saying, like, speaking purely numbers now, if you get over 50%, you're allowed to generalize, because that's exactly what the term means, in general, which means that if you get more than half of a particular group of people or things behave or are a particular way, then you could say, you can correctly say that in general, such and such and such is such and such and such. So we're well within our rights to generalize and say, yes, the left is more or less runs on emotions, and the right more or less runs on logic and data and facts. Now, when you say logic, you know, because the left brain gets a bad rap, and this is first and foremost, you know, spirituality, conspiracy channel. So of course, I, like everyone else that's part of this scene, is, you know, does not really respect the left brain as much as I respect the right brain. Okay, even though, although I am very left-brained myself, I do recognize, like many in our scene, that the right brain is superior. Okay, intuition and so on. But intuition is a completely different thing to running. See, intuition is up here because it's like corresponds to the higher levels of the tree of life. If you remember that 10-minute segment I had before with that tree of life diagram. Sorry, I'm in Greece, so noise pollution is a thing here. So it corresponds. The intuition corresponds to the higher levels of the tree of life, not the lower. Or you can see in terms of chakras, so I don't confuse people that are not well versed in with the Kabbalistic stuff. Like the intuition corresponds, you know, to the 6th, the 7th chakra, not to the lower emotions, which are of the solar plexus, 3rd chakra, and the second one, which is the sacral. I mean, there's different levels of emotional expression. Okay, so a lot of the people that are stuck here basically operate on the lower intuition, let's say, which is basically like a more primal, animal type of, I mean, I don't want to say reptilian, but it's closer to the fight or flight impulse than it is to the higher mind, to the higher self. Okay, so it's not true intuition. It's not, you know, it doesn't matter that the yin is traditionally associated with intuition and so on, but that's only in its evolved states. Most people that are caught up in emotions they're basically like very low level fight or flight base emotions, like that have to do with essentially just STS, service to self type of concerns. Okay, so this is the problem, and also there's been other studies that say that the people that are particularly at the far ends of the left spectrum here, it's been proven beyond doubt by psychologists, that they have a much higher incidence of mental illness than people anywhere on the right, anywhere on the spectrum on the right have, or anywhere on the, you know, spectrum of the left, like from here to here, say. So out of the entire thing, you know, we could say that 80 or 90% of the crazies are all concentrated in that tiny little percentage of the left there. So this is why it ends up being more destructive in the end. If these people take over, if it becomes like if we get like a Russian Bolshevism situation, a 2.0 of that, then you have these people taking over this, and eliminating the opposition, just like happened in Russia. So then there's a tiny number of people that control the entire society, and then they take out everyone from here as well. Whoever their ideology, their idea pathogen tells them must be eliminated for the good of all, like how they killed the kulaks and everything else, everyone else in Russia. Or Pol Pot, you know, he killed all the intellectuals. And it's been done again and again everywhere. It's the same template. We don't want it. We don't want to see it happening again. But you know, unfortunately, it might happen again. I mean, I'm seeing it. I'm seeing it getting there, getting towards it, because this side, like I said, like the overwhelming majority of the truly crazy people would be concentrated here, and then a much smaller percentage here, and you know, a certain percentage maybe in bits and pieces here on the spectrum, but you know, whatever the number might be, 70, 80%, 90, it's over there. I mean, you see them, you see the way they look when you look at like the mug shots of Antifa, or you look at pictures from the far left demonstrators in the streets and stuff. They just look unhinged, man. I'm not being biased here. Well, I'm probably biased because I'm a fucking normal human being, so to me they look unhinged, but they're pretty much unhinged. So you don't see that on the well, a little bit. I mean, but the most, I mean, I'm a little bit biased, I guess, but the most extreme thing that you would see on the far right here, as far as behavior, would be, I guess, just a tendency for violence, you know, and the racist type of sentiments, like the overtly racist stuff. I mean, I'm a nationalist in a sense of, but I just think everyone should try their best to stay in their own country and surround themselves with their own tribe and marry of their own tribe and all this stuff, because simply they're just going to be happier. Really they are, because I've tried both. And I've, you know, compared Athens to Melbourne, where I've lived in both, and I'm like, nah, the multiculturalism experiment, no, sorry, I'm full, thanks. I'm sorry, I've had enough. I'm full. I've had 20 years of Melbourne. No, that's all right. That's okay. Here, take it back. Here, you can have it. Okay, so it's just a logical conclusion. It's not racist or anything. It's just multiculturalism, not happy. Nationalism, happier. I'm going to choose the option that makes me and other people happy. That's all I'm saying. But you know, yeah, there's some element. Some people taking that thing that idea that I just described now, taking it too far, to the point where, to the degree where, you know, you just look at someone that's of a different skin color, different race, and you just don't like them for no reason at all, just because they are what they are. I mean, that is to me the definition of racism. But saying that, well, I feel like I'm happier in a place like Greece, in a city like Athens, than I would be in a city like Melbourne, where it's multicultural Babylon. It's a Babylon, right? I just felt not happy there because, well, less happy, actually, because it's just harder to find people that get you, to meet people that get you, whether same-sex friends or romantic partners. You just don't fit in. You just don't feel as cohesive and loved and strong. So this thing, this gaslighting phrase that we constantly hear, diversity is strength, that's Orwellian gaslighting. You know, it's like in 1984, in the novel 1984, where the party was saying stuff like war is peace, you know, so it's contradictory. It's not, diversity is not strength, it's weakness. It weakens people. Like, strength is when you're surrounded by individuals who have a very similar morphogenetic field as you do. So then you feel a resonance with that, and combining that morphogenetic field together, synergy creates more, two minds together are the equivalent of 5 minds, okay, if they resonate, if they're in simpatico. So this is the case energetically when you get together family. This is why blood family is so important. That's why you feel like this kinship. I mean, not all blood family gets along, but for the most part it's good to hang out with your own DNA. I mean, there's a special vibe that you get when you're with blood family, and it's because of that, because you have pretty much identical morphogenetic field, okay? Because DNA is not a physical thing only. We only see its physical expression in the 3D, but DNA is I can make never-ending videos about that subject. So if you share the same DNA or similar DNA with someone, i.e. family or slash same race, tribe, which your tribe is basically like an extended family, you know what I mean? So it's like all Greek people are kind of like as if they were fourth or fifth cousins of mine, and this applies to everyone in with their own tribe. Okay, this way you feel different always with your own tribe versus with other people. Of course, there's spiritual family also. There's spiritual soul groups and stuff. That's why the light worker, light warrior, starseed type of people, they connect with people of other races incredibly well. Surprisingly well sometimes. A lot of the times we meet them off Facebook and stuff like that. Never met them before, but it's like, oh my god, you're like a brother, blah blah blah. I've had this. I'm sure many people watching have experienced it. But in a mundane sense, because most people are not have not reached 5D consciousness and enlightenment and all that yet, most people must abide by their parameters, by the laws, by the natural laws that rule this lower 3D dimension now, right? So the DNA plays a very important part in this game here on this prison planet. So it creates particular energy around you, this morphogenetic field, because a morphogenetic field, for those who don't know, is the memory that you inherit from your ancestors and so on, including karmic memory. So it's this whole package, it's this energy field that surrounds you, basically, that makes you who you are. Gives you your personality, gives you your physical appearance, your skin color, your eye color, everything, your traits and all that. And that is directly tied to the DNA. Okay. So then when people are saying that race does not exist, it's a social construct, DNA means F all, stuff like that, that's violating natural law, because it's patently false and ridiculous. Okay. So back to the morphogenetic field thing, and for people that have never heard about that or that don't know much about it, look into Rupert Sheldrake's work on this. So the more you are surrounded by individuals with as similar as possible morphogenetic fields as to your own, the stronger and happier and more cohesive and accepted and loved and stuff, and less stressed and so on that you would feel. I've confirmed this. Like I said 5 minutes ago, I've confirmed this for myself. I did not know that this was going to happen. It happened organically. I was born in Australia. I did primary school there. The family moved to Greece. That was a good move. As in the right choice, I mean. So then from 12 to 21 I did like high school in Athens and went to the army and so on. So then for a variety of reasons I went back to Melbourne, 21 years old, and I returned back to Greece now again, about 1.5 years ago. So at the time when I was in Athens in my teenage years, I had no idea that this, the Greek experiment, let's call it, of this latest version of the Greek nation, the Hellenic Republic, which was founded after we kicked out the Turks about 200 years ago. So I didn't know that this experiment was quite unique compared to all other nations, and particularly the European nations and Western nations of the world, in that it was quite nationalistic, as a matter of fact. A lot of the people that were behind the Greek the movement of the Greek independence 200 years ago, that fanned the flames of the revolution and so on, both Greeks and foreigners, they were quite strong believers in nationalism, okay, an ethnocentric nationalist state. So that's what these people wanted to create in Greece with the new version of the latest version of the Greek nation. I didn't know this, of course, when I was a teenager living here, and I thought it was just normal. I thought that every city, every country was like that. What I experienced in Athens, like, you know, basically 95% of the people you're surrounded by are the same. They're like extended family, got the same views, same culture, more or less, similar type of humour, sense of humour, very similar surnames, you know, a lot of them ending in Opolis and stuff like mine is. So I thought, okay, this is how every other country is. So then I went back to Melbourne thinking that it was the SHIT, and it totally wasn't. Maybe it was for the first 5 minutes. But anyway, long story short, I realized quite, you know, very quickly I thought, oh, I see. So this thing I experienced in Athens, that was anything but the norm. It's not supposed to be the norm anywhere. At least now it's not, because Greece nowadays is becoming more and more multicultural as well. But back at that time, like late 80s, early 90s, when I did my high school stint here in Athens, it was just, you know, like there was no concept of this melting pot of nations, because this is exclusively an Anglosphere idea, okay, which is inculcated into the Anglosphere by people that have ulterior motives for doing so, okay, to put it lightly. So essentially I organically, like without planning it, without thinking about it, without ever contemplating the subject of race or whatever, nationalism versus multiculturalism versus whatever, experientially, through my experience, through my lived experience, I saw this. I'm like, well, this just doesn't work. I feel that I was happier much happier in a situation like Athens, because it's like being surrounded by all these dudes that just get me, and they look like me, and they don't judge me in ways that I would be judged in a place like Melbourne, where, I mean, of course, there's also the matter of me not being the dominant part of the dominant majority in Melbourne, okay? So perhaps if I was in Greece, which I am now, perhaps if I was in Greece and it was hypothetically quite a multicultural, quote, melting pot of races, unquote, if I had the majority privilege still, you know, if the authentic Greek people were about 70% of the population, roughly, and then the other 30% was whatever, a variety, I probably would be far happier here than I would have been somewhere in Melbourne or New York or London or something like that, because I still would be the majority, part of the majority. So the whole point is to have a majority of people around you that are of the same morphogenetic field makeup, okay? So of course there is like collective morphogenetic field for the entire. So this is where the leftist idea takes it too far and says, oh, we're all the same and DNA doesn't really matter, and you know, like they've proven that 99% of our DNA is all the same, and you know, this difference we see in skin color and characteristics and blah 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 only accounts for, you know, 0.5% or whatever it is. It's a very small number, something like that. Anyway, so you know, so therefore they conclude that, well, if the overwhelming percentage of the DNA is identical in all people, no matter the race, then we should just ignore the so-called surface differences that we have. But then it emerges that there's this thing of the morphogenetic field, and even though we might differ, you know, 2 percentage points or whatever, the DNA, it doesn't mean that the differences are not significant, okay, and that they should be ignored. So we do have the collective morphogenetic field of human beings. It's the memory, the cosmic memory, right? The template, the template of creation, or the creation of the human body, basically, that gives us, all of us, 2 legs and 2 arms and 2 eyes and stuff and hair. You know, these are the things that make us human, and it's the common ground that we all share, of course. But then there's a lower level beneath that. It's like the tribal morphogenetic field. So each sub-race of humanity also has their own particular morphogenetic field that's been a result of the particular the unique characteristics that each tribe of mankind has. Each major tribe, there's about 4 major ones, has developed over thousands of years of evolving under particular conditions, geographical locations and weather conditions and so on. You know, people that evolved in the colder climates are very different to the people that evolved in the warmer climates. Like, for instance, Southern Europeans and Northern Europeans are quite different. I get offended when the Northern Europeans do not consider Greeks to be white, but the fact is that we are quite different, though, that is true. But overall we're all Europeans, and overall we're all humans, obviously. But there are significant differences that, when ignored, we become unhappy, because you can't ignore reality. So that was a long one with a morphogenetic field, but I think it was important. But at the end of the day, the right goes on logic, the left goes on assumptions and emotions for the most part. So whether we like it or not, I think a conflict is coming, and it's going to get hot. People are saying, no, we're too civilized for this, but they said the same, I'm sure, if you look at the media and everything, and interviews and books of intellectuals 100 years ago, roughly, you'll find the same sentiments. People will be saying, no, we already had a First World War, and, you know, or even before the First World War, they probably didn't believe it was going to happen, but then it was like, okay, I mean, they called it the Great War, the first one, so it's like, well, this is the Great War, the war to end all wars, they also called it that. So they thought, okay, it's not going to happen again. No, that's okay. So it happens again, about 20 years later. No one saw that coming. So maybe again, something like this is going to happen, because the conflict, because these guys are not going to stop. They're never going to stop. That's the problem. But the good news, though, is that this side is also going to stand up and fight. It's like the big dog that is sitting there looking at that little dog yelping at its feet and thinking, I can just grab you and snap your neck just like that. So this is what this side is going to do eventually, and it's going to retaliate. So, and then it's going to be this. But I and many others all over the internet, all over the world, in academia, in whatever setting, one of the main reasons we're doing all this stuff is so we can prevent a hot war, a hot conflict from occurring. We want to stop it. We want to create, as much as we can, convince people to engage in dialogue and reason before it gets to that. But who knows, maybe they won't listen, maybe it'll eventually happen again, but know that if it does, the left is going to have a disastrous defeat in the end. It will. It's just going to, it will not work, like with communism in Russia. They thought it was perfect. They thought, okay, finally, after killing all these people, now we can relax. No, it all crumbled.
Hey, where do you think you're going? Subscribe. Subscribe. Come on. Subscribe. Thank you. Till next time.